Hey everybody, this is Geneva of Geneva's Closet Talk Show. Please make sure you like and share this video and subscribe to Geneva's Closet if you haven't already done so right here on YouTube. And you can follow me on Facebook at Geneva's Closet. And you can email me at genevascloset22@gmail.com. Now, let's get into the news. Sexual confusion. Feelings of sexual inadequacy permeated the life of Marvin Gaye Jr. Complicating matters even more was his father's sexual ambivalence. Both men saw sex as a dangerous force that threatened and finally destroyed their peace of mind and the virtuous life they inspired to lead. Dewey Hughes, now an entertainment business executive, went to Randall Junior High School with Marvin and lived in the same neighborhood. He knew him well between the ages of 12 and 14. Like many of us, Marvin was a boy in pain. He wasn't to singing, that was something you can never kid him about, and he was also very shy, very afraid of girls. He wore his sensitivity on his sleeve. I don't think there's any doubt that he was ashamed of his father. We'd never be invited inside Marvin's home, no matter what. It was evident to us that Mr. Gaye was a flamboyant and extremely effeminate man. Marvin was kidded about that by the older kids. To be called a sissy or have your father called a sissy was the lowest insult. In the ghetto, the cats were the crudest, putting you in the dozens. Those games of verbal abuse triggered bloody fights. But Marvin wasn't a fighter. Rather than express his anger, he absorbed it. A strong sexual ambiguity surrounding Mr. Gaye was something I noticed the first time I met him in 1979. Though at the time Marvin was 40, in his reluctance to have me knock on his father's bedroom door, I sensed the same shame Dewey Hughes mentioned in describing Marvin at 12. In each of our interviews, Mr. Gaye wore at least one unusual article of clothing, a lacy blouse-like shirt or a pair of flowery socks. His speech and language were soft and overly feminine. Mr. Gaye, said Dewey Hughes, was definitely a show. He sought and liked attention. My father, Marvin told me in Europe in 1982 during a discussion of sexual healing, likes to wear women's clothing. As you well know, that doesn't mean he's homosexual. In fact, my father was always known as a ladies' man. He simply likes to dress up. What he does in private, I really don't know, nor do I care to know. You met him at a time when he was relatively cool about it. There have been other periods when his hair was very long and curled under, and when he seemed quite adamant in showing the world the girlish side of himself. That may have been to further embarrass me. I found the situation all the more difficult because, to tell you the truth, I have the same fascination with women's clothes. In my case, that has nothing to do with any attraction for men. Sexually, men don't interest me, but seeing myself as a woman is something that intrigues me. It's also something I fear. I indulge myself only at the most discreet and intimate moments. Afterwards, I must bear the guilt and shame for weeks. After all, indulgence of the flesh is wicked, no matter what your kick. The hot stuff is lethal. I've never been able to stay away from the hot stuff. Shame and guilt haunted Marvin as a child. I wanted to beat the shit out of the guys when they teased me about father, Marvin said. I wanted to smash their faces and cut their throats, but I was afraid. I suppose I was afraid that I was just like them, that I was too much of a woman to fight back. Instead of taking my blows like a man, I ran. My main memories of growing up have to do with running. And believe me, I was fast. Football, basketball, you name it. But I was scared of the confrontation, so I backed off. Did he believe his father was homosexual? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. I just drove the thought out of my mind. I asked Mrs. Gray the same question about her husband. I'm not certain. I do know that 5 of his siblings were homosexual, and it's true that he liked soft clothing. Soft things of all kinds attracted him. He liked to wear my panties, my shoes, my gowns, even my nylon hose. Marvin would see him like that sometimes. Confusion about manhood would become another great theme in Marvin Gaye's life. His search for strong male role models led him into boxing rings and onto football fields while he fought to prove, fought to deny, fought to win his self-respect, attempts which proved futile. He was also convinced that he had inherited what he considered father's streak of laziness. Gaye Sr.'s chronic unemployment was another reason Marvin was so frustrated and angry with his father. I worked for the post office, Mr. Gaye told me, as well as the Air Force and Western Union. But a back injury laid me off early, and I left Western Union because I absolutely refused to work on Saturday, the Sabbath. Bishop Rawlings' memory was that Mr. Gaye worked very little, and according to Beatrice Carson, it was Mrs. Gaye who supported the family. Baby and I both worked as domestics. We'd cook and take care of the kids. We'd mop and clean and do whatever was needed. During the winters, we stand on the corner when it was 15 degrees with freezing sleet and snow coming down while we waited for the bus to take us to Maryland or Virginia. I never did know Mr. Gaye to work. I wake up 4 or 5 in the morning to go out to work, Mrs. Gaye remembered, while my children and husband stayed in bed. I didn't have any choice. I had to bring in the food, and I did. I'm proud of myself. I kept my family alive. My mother used to tell me a story, Frankie Gaye remembered, about 2 mice drowning in a cup of milk. One complained and panicked and screamed and finally went under. The other one calmly kept kicking and kicking until the milk turned to cream and the cream turned to butter, and the little mouse just walked on out. Mother had faith. She believed in hard work. Father didn't. I remember Mr. Gaye telling me a job he had held for a very short time, said Bishop Solomon. He said he worked as a chauffeur for the government. I never will forget the reason he gave for leaving. He told me he had very tender feet. All told, Jeannie Gaye remembered, I don't think Father worked for more than 3 years, if that much. Among the several sins I got from Father, Marvin stated, is a love of loafing. Neither of us particularly likes to work. The difference is, I finally made money while nothing, not even the sight of Mother cleaning rich people's toilets for slave wages, could ever motivate Father to abandon his life of leisure. Oh, he had made the king and his secret life. If Marvin saw Father as a king, he quickly began perceiving himself as a prince. Did baby spoil Marvin? Mrs. Carson asked herself. I know we all tried our best to protect him from his father. He needed a lot of attention. That boy did. And I don't see how his mother could have done anything else but smother him with love. Besides, Marvin was the kind of boy you couldn't help but love. Mother was a devout church member, Jeannie said. She believed those teachings of the house of God, which insisted that a woman be submissive to her husband. Her religious convictions obligated her to obey Father, no matter what. Mother was caught in between, Marvin explained. She was too afraid of Father to openly defy him. He might strike her. He might put her out. But as time went on, she quickly saw that I was going to be able to do something for her that Father couldn't. Give her money. As a kid, I thought of robbing banks so she wouldn't have to work night and day to provide for us. But I couldn't do that. I wasn't raised that way. You must understand that I was a good boy. In Simple City, the Gays might have been perceived as strange, but we were looked up to. We lived by principles. Mother especially. Her kindness and generosity were legendary. She took in people and fed neighbors, even when we were still dirt poor. The woman suffered so, and yet her suffering seemed to make her stronger. The older I've gotten, the more I've wished that all women could be like my mother. A fixation on mother remained a permanent part of Gaye's psyche. To please, support, and protect her was a need and desire that dominated every phase of his life. Marvin measured all other women against mother, whom he saw as purity and perfection. In his sight, no other woman, save his father's wife, would ever make him happy. His search for the ideal female, someone whose patience and approval of him knew no limits, dominated Marvin's romantic imagination. At the first sign of a woman's imperfection, Gaye despaired, often growing violent, unable to accept the fact that his view of this mythically untainted woman was shattered. Stimulation. As an adolescent, Marvin was stimulated by the overriding powers of sex and singing. Those two preoccupations often merged into a single psychological force which brought both pleasure and fear as Marvin sought the courage to move from fantasy to performance. Singing was something that pleased his mother. She was far more tolerant than her husband of secular music, and throughout her son's life, she encouraged his singing and approved of his ambition to become a popular recording artist. On the other hand, though father appreciated blues and jazz, he considered it devilish. His church had absolute views on the subject. The house of God, he told me, can never really approve of any music that does not praise God. Marvin's first forays into non-religious singing were, at least in part, a defiance of father. As a preacher's son, Gaye felt alienated from the normal world of teenagers who played baseball in sandlots and kissed girls on park benches. Music was a way for Marvin to ease into that world, to gain acceptance while expressing his romantic soul. Junior high, remember Dewey Hughes, was when all the serious singing began. In the hallways between classes, all the time. There was a fascinating relationship between sex and singing. Those of us who were musically inclined were looked upon with suspicion. A lot of the guys thought we were sissies. They were also jealous that our singing attracted the girls. It was pretty singing, very soft and melodic. In our neighborhood, when cats no older than 11 used to boast that they were already going all the way with girls, Marvin and I were still virgins when we started school, though we never admitted. Around the ages of 12 and 13, Marvin reflected, I became fascinated with masturbation. Naturally, this was normal, though at the time, I didn't know that. I didn't compare notes with the other boys, but I've a feeling I was a much heavier masturbator than the average teenager. I tried to get myself to stop, but once I discovered how fantasy feeds feeling, I was gone. I knew it was wrong, and I promised God I never touch myself again. The promises never lasted more than a day. I remember feeling the shivering release of my first orgasm and understanding that in my life, the pleasures of the devil were going to give the joys of God some mighty stiff competition. Geraldine Trice Adams, called Peasy, lived down the street and became a close friend and protector of Marvin's. It didn't look like Marvin's daddy ever worked too much, said Peasy. He'd sit on the porch and water the lawn. He was a little snarly, and Lord knows he stayed on Marvin's case. Seemed like Mr. Gaye was riding the gravy train. Just to pass the time during the days, he'd ride the bus all the way to the White House and back. Sometimes he'd bring Kool-Aid to the construction workers or bus drivers. He was definitely the neighborhood character, always dressed sharp, sometimes in wigs, sometimes in shorts and V-neck t-shirts. Not that he didn't have class. We always thought that the Gays, all of them, were very classy, educated people. They stood out. They spoke well. And Marvin's mama, she had an especially kind heart. I remember how Mr. Gaye used to kick Marvin out of the house. Happened all the time. Marvin became a floater. He hide out and you never be sure of where he was staying. Sometimes he come stay with us. Well, his mama would be so worried that she slipped me some money for Marvin. Don't tell his daddy, she'd say, but just make sure my boy gets this. By the time I was ready to start high school, Marvin said, things between me and father turned from bad to worse. I'd reached physical maturity. Even though I'd grown taller and stronger than father, he was still beating me. I wanted to strike back, but where I come from, even to raise your hand to your father is an invitation for him to kill you. Father became stricter, demanding that I conform to his ridiculous curfew rules. If I came home a minute late, he was like, it was like I defied all 10 commandments. The more demanding father became, the more rebellious I grew. I would like to know how you all feel about this situation, and while you are letting me know, could you please like and share this video and subscribe to Genevas Closet if you haven't already done so right here on YouTube. And you can follow me on Facebook at Genevas Closet, and you can email me at genevascloset22@gmail.com. You all have a fabulous day, and I will talk to you later. Bye.